hit you up for money. All right, Paul is talking about taking up a collection for the saints. We started looking at this last week, and I gave you just an overview. We went back into Acts, and we saw that there was a time of famine in not just limited to Israel, but in the entire Middle East, and so the churches were cooperating to take up a collection to send it back to help the believers in Jerusalem. And Paul says in chapter 16, verse 2, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. We kind of stopped there and talked about giving. Let me ask a couple of questions. What was the emphasis that we saw would be on the first day of the week? Not on the Sabbath. What was the focus on the first day of the week? The resurrection. And this is still more of the idea of bringing the idea away from the law and away from the old way of doing things to the New Testament, which focuses on the resurrection and the freedom in the resurrection, not the law. How many people were supposed to give? Everyone. That is a singular word. Literally every single one. I can't, if I had $1 for every believer I've met in my ministry who thought they were exempt from giving for whatever reason, I could retire. That's how much money I'd have. It's amazing how many people think, I don't need to give. Well, wait a minute. If God's blessed you and God's prospered you, what does God expect you to do? Hello? Give, okay? There's not an exception clause, okay? You can go to the book of exceptions and you won't find that you're the special one, and if God's blessed you and prospered you and given to you, that you don't have to give, okay? I mean, He expects us all to give. Why? Because He's greedy? Because He needs it? Because He's given to us, guys. It's not a trick answer. Look at the verse again. Let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him. If God has prospered you, and legitimately He's prospered every one of us, being prospered here doesn't have the idea of being rich and having everything you ever wanted and getting that 21-foot Triton with the 300 horsepower motor. And once you've gotten everything you want, then you've been prospered, then you start giving. No, that's not the way it works. How often? Upon the first day of the week? So how often should this event be taking place? How many first days of the week are there? How often do you have a first day of the week? That'd be like every week, right? There's a first day of the week every week. So what is God telling us here about our giving? Give me a word. Regular, systematic. Will it always be the same amount? Could be, if He prospers you by the same amount every week. But we've got some basically guys that run their own business. Rick, Rich, Paul, any other self-employed guys in here? I mean, one week Paul might make $2 million doing sheetrock. Yeah, I expect to see that thing in the bulletin jump up when that happens, all right? That giving. But let's say you're a self-employed guy and you go on those 6-week deals where you don't do any work. What then? Does God expect you to go hungry just so you can give? You have to think it through, all right? I know I ran my own business, and there were times where the business could only pay me enough. How long did we go for just eating grits, Lisa? About a 5-week stretch in Bible college where we had grits because that's how slow the work was. And I think our offer, we still gave every week, but it wasn't what we typically gave because, I mean, when you're living off grits and water and tea's good. Tea and grits, man, you can't beat that. But the Lord was still blessing us and we were able to give a little bit. And so the amount went up and down. Now, if I'm on a fixed income, then how much is God blessing me? Pretty much the same every week. So you have to think through these things in your mind, okay, when it talks about being prospered. But the idea that just because I'm me, I'm special, I'm exempt, God did not design the body for takers. Okay? He designed the body to be mutually edifying. All right, what do we do with a part of our body physically that doesn't work and is simply taking? What do doctors usually want to do with that? Amputate it, cut it out, get rid of it, right? Why? Because it's harming the body. All right, and so you've got churches, and I don't know who gives what in our churches, all right, in our church. I don't see the money, I don't touch money, I can't sign checks. I don't know who does what. It's none of my business. My business is just to preach what's here. But I know this, if you're not giving, you're missing out on the blessing. But some people say, well, I don't have enough to give. Well, I'm glad you said that. Look over at 2 Corinthians. We'll get back to this eventually as we get into 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, I want to give you just a quick overview of a group of people who were great givers, but they were broke. They didn't have enough money to pay attention. You ever been there? I mean, it's not that you can't pay your bills. You can only have enough money to pay attention. This was the people here, the Macedonians, all right? So let's look at their condition. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse number 2. Paul is again dealing with the idea of giving for this same type collection and giving to the ministry. And he's talking about the Macedonians. He says in verse 2, how that in a great trial of affliction and abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves. So these were poor people who were in affliction. Okay? They were in difficulty. They're deep poverty. They weren't just semi-broke. They were in deep. None of us here are in deep poverty. Okay, I can take you to some places around the world and show you deep poverty. For us, deep poverty is like if we only have one car and the microwave's broken and we can't fix it, and we have to downgrade our cable package because it went up and we have to slow our bandwidth speed on the internet. That's poverty. No, that's not poverty. Okay? Deep poverty is you don't know where your next meal is coming from. That's how broke you are, if there be a next meal. These people are in deep poverty. But notice in verse number 3, they were willing. They had a willing heart. They gave themselves first. Here's what I've found. I'm just sharing my giving experiences with you. People that I generally have talked to throughout my years in ministry who have a difficulty in the idea of giving, they're not serving anyway. They're coming and setting and soaking up. They're not involved in any ministry. They're not utilizing their spiritual gift. They're just, I've called them, and the only word I can think of is takers. They're not participating to the edification of the body. They're not exercising a spiritual gift. Not because they're not physically able, not because they don't know their gift. They're just going to come and sit. And generally, those are the people who have a hard time giving because they haven't been willing to give themselves to God first. So he says these people were willing of themselves. They were willing to give themselves. Notice verse number 5. They were committed. And he clarifies this idea of giving. He says in verse 5, and this they did not as we had hoped, but first gave their own selves unto who? Unto the Lord. God had their heart. And when God gets a hold of your heart, folks, He's got your money, He's got your gift, He's got your abilities, He's got everything. But if He doesn't have your heart, He's not going to have any of it. And so we come and sit. Okay? These Macedonians were committed. They were yielded to God. They were yielded to whatever God had for them, and so they were able to give. Now, let's look on down. Their priority in giving. Notice verse number 8. He says, I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of our heart to prove the sincerity of your love. We give out of love. All right, one of the ways we show God we love Him is that we give, and that's showing not only we love Him, but we trust Him. Who gave you everything you have? God did. Who can take it just as quickly? God can. And we should be thankful, and we should show our love to Him and trust Him enough to say, hey, God, you gave me this much. He doesn't ask for it all back. Aren't you thankful for that? He just says give. Now, we talked about the tithe a little bit last week. Did we talk about the tithe? Okay, it's the law, but the tithe was actually first mentioned pre-law. Who was the first one that we are told gave a tenth of all? Abraham, where are we told that? Okay, in Genesis, we're told that Moses made an offering to Melchizedek. It's in Hebrews that we find that he gave a tenth of all, okay, of whatever he had taken from the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the word tithe means what? Tenth. So that's a good starting point. If you're not giving, if you're struggling with giving, that's just a good place to start. And it's amazing when you give God that, you find you can trust Him to meet your need. You know what? We could stop and do testimonies again, right? If you give a tenth to God, let me just ask you generally, does He not more than bless you for that tenth? He does. Not a problem. But what you give is between you and God. It's not between you and me or you and what. It's between you and God, okay? But it starts with love. Then verse 10, notice there is a consistency. It says, "Hereon I give my advice, for it's expedient for you who have begun before not only to do, but to also be forward a year ago." So he's saying, what you've been doing, keep doing it. Notice the quality down in verse 12. It was sacrificial. He said, "For if there first be a willing," what? Mind. We hear a lot about the mind, right? So if we're not giving and we think we're exempt from giving, where's our mind? Is it focused on things above? Probably not. If the mind is set on things above, if we're putting the right things in the mind, we're going to have a willing mind when it comes to this area of giving. Now, you can follow through what I'm telling you. Generally, the person not giving is not serving. Here we see if the mind is right, we'll be giving. So what are some things that we can add up about people who understand God's plan for the church is that we support the church, but they make a decision, I'm not giving. Their mind's not right, more likely they're not serving, and they're not giving. Okay? Just what we see here. Okay? I hate teaching on giving. It's probably the most uncomfortable thing I do, other than like maybe doing weddings or something. I'm just kidding. All right. Sacrificial, verse 12. So the heart is right. A willing mind is accepted according to that man, not according to what he has not. For I mean not that other men be eased by and you be burdened, but by an equality that now is time for your abundance may be a supply for their want. Their abundance may also be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. So you see God's plan as believers. When He blesses me, I can give to meet needs. So when Paul gets that $2 million sheetrock contract and God has blessed him and he can give, he's meeting needs that maybe one of our other self-employed guys is in that stretch where nothing's happening. But it balances out. That's God's way of doing it. All right? Some people say, well, how about I give my labor? Okay, that would be cool if you could show me anywhere in Scripture where God said, hey, don't give, just give your labor. Does anybody know what verse that's in where God says, just give your labor and not give financially? Is that Exceptions or what's that other book? I think it's Second Exceptions. That won't fly. Okay, these people didn't say, hey, we'll come down and build a house for you. No, Paul said take a collection. When? First day, and who is to give? Everyone. Okay? So he's telling them here, this is God's plan. All right, then verse 15, he goes on, he says, as it is written, he that hath gathered much had nothing left over, and he that gathered little had no lack. So in those times where you get a lot, give. And then when you can't, don't. Give what you can. Okay? Sowing and reaping. He goes on in chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians talking about giving. He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse number 6, but this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap sparingly, he which soweth bountifully shall reap bountifully. God will bless generous giving. That's just a principle across the board. Okay? If we're generous with what God has given us, we will never, ever go without. You know why? God will make sure we never go without. Okay? I've met some people that are such givers, they don't even care if they go without. They just want to keep giving. Are we out of time? I just got a text message. Why would somebody text me in church? Oh, it's a notification for a bass tournament. Sorry. All right. We'll go down. We'll look at one more aspect of giving. All right. I thought somebody next door saying, hey, send them over to get their kids. Look at verse 7. Why do we give? Well, there are a couple of reasons, but the ultimate reason we give is so that God can bless us. Notice verse 7. Every man according as he purposes in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity. And by the way, that's the second time God has used that phrase in giving as he's purposed in his heart. So giving is a what issue? It's a heart issue. All right? If your heart is wrong, you're not going to give. You're just not. He makes it clear twice in 2 chapters. Actually, 3 if we go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. 3 times in the context of giving as we purpose in our heart. So we're either going to purpose in our heart to trust God with what he's blessed us with, or we're going to purpose in our heart to hoard what he's blessed us with. Okay? We're going to make that decision. But notice what he says. Don't do it grudgingly or of necessity. Why? What does God think about a cheerful giver? What does it say right there? God loveth a cheerful giver. And then notice verse 8. And who is able? Verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, the giver, that ye always having how much sufficiency? All sufficiency in how many things? May do what unto every good work? Abound. Do you think if God blesses you and he says, hey, give me some of it back, he's going to be stingy and make you go without and do without and not bless you? That's not what this passage tells us, does it? Now, we don't give to get. We give because we love God. We give because our heart's right. But in that giving, God promises blessing. How many of you have sacrificially given from time to time, and God has blessed you in a way you never saw coming, you never expected until he did it? Can I see your hands? Okay, look around the room. That's pretty much everybody. It's amazing how God does that. So let me encourage you, if you want to experience, we talked about stepping out in faith this morning and how fear drives faith away. You know why a lot of people don't give? They're afraid. They don't believe God can meet their needs. Now, they're not going to be that unspiritual and say, God, I don't believe you can really meet my need. But that's the reason. Trust God. Step out, trust him, and see what he'll do for you. There's more here. We'll finish it up next week. A couple more things in this chapter to help you understand giving. Yes, Alan?
One question that comes back to the beginning is, does God need it?
No, God doesn't need us for anything.
Psalm chapter 50, specifically starting in verse 7, really lays out God doesn't have any. He doesn't need our sacrifices. He doesn't need anything.
No.
It's for our good.
Yeah, for me personally, giving's been a faith builder as I've given through the years. It's just amazing what I've seen God do, the needs he's met, the things he's provided. So just encourage you. I don't know who gives, none of my business. That's between you and God. But I will tell you, if you're not giving, you're missing out on the blessing. So trust God, step out there, and see what he'll do. All right? All right, well, we're done. I think they're probably going to be about finished in Awana, so you can probably go get your kids here in a minute. So let's go ahead and pray, and you guys can go home. Let's pray. Father, thank you tonight for